They always said she was the perfect daughter, even before I could tie my own shoes. I'd already heard it 100 times. Clara is such a bright child. Clara makes us so proud. Why can't you be more like your sister? Those words used to sting, but eventually they became normal. Like background noise in my own home, my sister Clara had this glow about her. The kind of presence that filled every room she walked into. She was beautiful, confident, charming, the kind of girl people gravitated toward without even knowing why. And I was the quiet one, the one who sat in the corner, watching everyone else be amazed by her. I loved her. I really did. But loving someone who always stands in your spotlight is exhausting. When we were kids, I remember this one summer afternoon. We were about 8 and 10. Our parents had invited the neighbors over, and everyone was out in the garden. I'd spent all week painting this little picture of our family, stick figures, messy colors, but it was mine. I wanted to show Mom and Dad, to see them smile at something I made. But just as I handed it over, Clara walked in, holding a bunch of daisies she'd picked from the backyard. My mother gasped, "Oh, Clara!" How thoughtful. You always know how to make things beautiful. And just like that, my painting was forgotten. I remember standing there, clutching that paper so tightly that the edges tore. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Years passed, and the pattern never changed. Every report card, every school play, every birthday, Clara was the golden child. She won dance competitions, got top grades, and somehow managed to charm every teacher in the building. Meanwhile, I worked hard. I stayed up late, studied, practiced, tried to get everything right. But even when I succeeded, it was never enough. If Clara got an A, my A didn't count because, as Mom once said, well, Clara got hers first. It's funny how small comments can carve deep scars. When you hear over and over again that you're less than, you start to believe it. You start to fade into the background. Not because you want to, but because it feels safer there. I became invisible in my own house. By the time we reached high school, Clara had turned into something of a local celebrity. Head of the debate club, class president, winner of some national essay contest. Our parents couldn't stop talking about her. Every family dinner became a stage for her victories. Clara got invited to that leadership program. Clara's photo is in the newspaper again. Clara's teacher says she could be valedictorian. And me? I became the audience to her life story. I'd sit there, pushing food around my plate, nodding, smiling when I was supposed to. No one asked how my day went. Sometimes I'd imagine standing up and shouting, "What about me?" But I never did, because I already knew what the answer would be. Still, I kept trying. I joined the art club. I started writing for the school paper. I volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. I wanted to make my parents proud, even if just for a moment. But every time I tried, Clara was already there. Brighter, louder, better. One day, the school hosted an art fair. I'd spent months working on my piece, a painting that meant everything to me. It was abstract, emotional, full of colors that I'd never dared to use before. My art teacher said it was powerful. I thought maybe, just maybe, it could be my moment. The day of the fair, my parents came, of course. But only because Clara had a speech to give for the student council. When they walked past my booth, I smiled and said, "Mom, Dad, this one's mine." They stopped, glanced at it, and my dad said, "That's nice." "Honey?" before turning back to listen to Clara's speech echo through the gym speakers. My teacher placed a small first prize ribbon on my easel that day. I should have felt proud, but all I felt was empty, because the only people I wanted to see it didn't. That night as we drove home, Mom said, "Clara, you spoke so well today. You have such a gift." I was in the back seat staring out the window, clutching the ribbon in my hand. Not one word about my painting. Not one. That was the night I stopped trying to compete. If being good wasn't enough, maybe being invisible was easier, but invisibility has a price. The more they looked past me, the more something inside me started to harden. Slowly, silently. A tiny voice in the back of my head began to whisper, "One day they'll see. One day they'll realize what they missed." I didn't know when or how, but I made a silent promise to myself that night. I wouldn't chase their approval anymore. I'd build my own path, even if no one cheered for me. And when that day came, when I finally stood in the light, they'd be watching. Not because I begged them to, but because they'd have no choice. High school came and went, and with it, the last traces of my childhood hope that one day my parents might finally see me. By then, it wasn't even jealousy anymore. It was survival. You learn to accept your role. Clara was the star, and I was the shadow. It's funny how people assume that being the other child means you don't care, that you're okay with fading into the background. But the truth? Every time I heard them praise her, a part of me dimmed a little more. At family gatherings, relatives would crowd around Clara like she was some rare gem. "Oh, Clara, I saw your photo in the paper. Your parents must be so proud. You've got such a bright future ahead of you." Then they'd turn to me with polite smiles. "And how about you, dear?" Still. Doing your art? Still, that word stung every time. As if my dreams were just hobbies waiting to be outgrown. After graduation, Clara got accepted into one of the best universities in the country. My parents threw a party for her. Balloons, cake, speeches, the works. When I got into a smaller art college a few months later, Mom simply said, "That's nice, honey. At least you'll be doing something you love. At least." It's strange how 2 words can make your entire achievement feel like a consolation prize. Clara left for college with hugs, tears, and a car packed full of gifts and letters from family friends. When it was my turn to leave, my dad dropped me off at the bus station, handed me a folded $20 bill, and said, "Call if you need anything. No hugs. No photos, just silence." As the bus pulled away, I stared out the window, watching the town shrink behind me. My heart felt heavy, but beneath that sadness, something else began to burn. Determination. If they couldn't see my worth, I'd show the world instead. Art school was nothing like I expected. It was messy, unpredictable, full of people who felt everything deeply, just like me. For the first time, I wasn't the quiet one or the other daughter. I was me. I made friends who didn't care who my sister was. Professors who actually noticed my work. For once, I felt seen. I started painting differently. Not for approval, but for expression. My art stopped trying to be beautiful and started being honest. Late nights in the studio, paint under my fingernails, music humming through the air. It became my therapy. My rebellion. While Clara's world revolved around perfection, mine revolved around truth. Occasionally, I'd get calls from home. Usually from Mom. "How's college?" She'd ask distractedly. "Good," I'd answer. "Clara just got an internship at a top law firm," she'd add, her voice bursting with pride. I'd smile through the phone. "That's great, Mom." Sometimes she'd pause, as if realizing she hadn't asked about me yet. "And how are your little paintings going?" She'd say, almost as an afterthought. "My little paintings." I'd laugh softly and say, "They're going great," because what else could I say? That I'd just sold my first piece in a student exhibition? That my professor said I had potential? None of it mattered to them. Not yet. Then came Christmas break. Clara came home in a tailored coat, carrying expensive gifts for everyone. She looked perfect. As always, glowing skin, polished hair, confidence radiating like sunlight. At dinner, my parents hung on her every word. She talked about her classes, her professors, her future in law. Dad beamed, saying, "You're going to make us so proud." Then, without even glancing at me, he added, "Your sister could learn a thing or two from your drive." Clara. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Drive. If only they knew how many sleepless nights I'd spent scraping together tuition money, working double shifts at a cafe, painting until sunrise, but I didn't say a word. I just smiled faintly and nodded. That's what you do when you live in someone's shadow. You learn to smile through the darkness. A few weeks later, I went back to college and threw myself into my work. Every ounce of pain, every drop of frustration I poured into my art. One day, my professor, Mr. Latham, pulled me aside. "There's something raw in your work," he said. "Something people feel." It was the first time anyone had said that to me. Not that my work was nice or pretty, but felt. He encouraged me to submit my collection to a regional art competition. I hesitated, part of me still afraid of failing, of proving my parents right. But another part whispered, "Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the moment they'll finally see me." Weeks later, the results came out. I'd won first place. I couldn't believe it. My art, my voice, and had been chosen. I wanted to call home, to tell them everything, so I did. Mom answered. Mom, I said, barely containing my excitement, I won. The regional art competition. I got first place. There was a pause. Then she said, Oh, that's wonderful, honey. By the way, Clara just got accepted into the International Law Exchange program. Can you believe it? My smile faded. I said, Wow, that's great, and hung up. And in that moment, I realized something. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I'd never be enough for them. But here's the thing about living in someone's shadow. It teaches you patience. Because shadows don't stay still forever. All it takes is one light. One spark to change everything, and mine was coming, soon. There's a moment in everyone's life when something inside you just breaks. For me, it happened one rainy afternoon during my final year of college. By then, I'd stopped calling home as often. The conversations always left me feeling smaller, so I buried myself in work instead. My senior project, a collection of mixed media paintings called Silent Hands, had been chosen to headline our graduation exhibit. It was my proudest achievement yet. Raw, emotional, deeply personal. It told the story of invisible effort, the hands that work, build, create, but are never seen. It was in every way about me. The exhibition was open to the public, and I'd sent my parents an invitation. I didn't expect them to come, but I hoped deep down they might. A week before the event, I got a message from Clara. Hey sis, heard about your little art show. That's so cute. I stared at the screen. She hadn't spoken to me in months, and now suddenly she cared. I replied politely, Thanks. It's a big deal for me. She sent back a heart emoji and nothing else. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The night before the exhibit, one of my classmates rushed into the studio. Hey, have you seen this? She asked, holding up her phone. On the screen was a video. Clara, standing at some corporate youth event, giving a speech about the power of invisible creators. She quoted lines from my artist statement word for word. My words, my ideas. Even one of my paintings, my design, was on her presentation slide. Without credit. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands started to shake. My sister had stolen my project. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, replaying her speech again and again. Hearing her confidently claim the thoughts and emotions I'd poured out of my soul. Hearing her get applause for something that came from my pain. By morning, I felt hollow. I wanted to confront her, scream at her, demand an explanation. But then I thought about my parents. They'd never believe me. If I told them, they'd say, Clara probably just got inspired by you. Or worse, don't be jealous of your sister's success. So, I said nothing. I went to the exhibition, smiled for the cameras, and pretended everything was fine. Inside, though, something changed forever. A few weeks later, Clara came home to visit. My parents threw a dinner in her honor. Our daughter, the rising star, my mother said proudly, showing off a magazine article featuring Clara and her innovative youth initiative. The photo in the article? A blurred shot of my art in the background. When I walked into the room, Clara smiled, all innocence and charm. Hey, sis. You saw the article? I nodded slowly. I did. Cool, right? I told them I was inspired by someone close to me, she said, smirking. I thought that was generous. Generous. That word burned through me like acid. I opened my mouth to speak, to finally expose her. But then I saw my parents' faces. The pride in their eyes. The way they looked at her as if she hung the moon. And I froze. Because I realized I wasn't just fighting her. I was fighting them all. That night, as they laughed and toasted around the table, I slipped away. I stood outside under the dark sky. The sound of their laughter muffled behind closed doors. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't feel sadness. I felt clarity. I was done trying to be part of their story. It was time to write my own. The next morning, I packed my bags. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I left a short note on the kitchen counter that simply said, I'm tired of being invisible. Don't look for me, and I walked away. No plan. No direction. Just freedom. It was terrifying. But for the first time, it was mine. I moved to the city and rented a tiny apartment that smelled like paint thinner and hope. Days were long, nights were longer. I took odd jobs, cafe shifts, tutoring, designing posters, anything to pay rent while I worked on my art. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. Every canvas became my therapy. Every brushstroke, a step toward reclaiming what was stolen from me. I promised myself I'd never let anyone silence me again. I didn't want revenge, not yet. What I wanted was independence, proof that I could stand on my own without them. Months turned into years. I kept working, submitting to local galleries, getting rejected, then trying again. Until one day I got an email. A renowned art foundation was hosting a national competition. The theme? Unseen voices. It felt like destiny. I poured everything I had into that project. Sleepless nights, endless revisions, raw emotion, and when I submitted it, I whispered to myself, this is for me, not for them. Weeks later, I got a call. Congratulations, the voice on the line said. You've been selected as a finalist. Your work will be televised at the National Art Awards next month. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Televised. The same family that never saw me, the same parents who only had eyes for Clara, would have no choice but to see me now. The irony was beautiful. That was the night everything shifted inside me. Not anger. Not hatred power, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't destroy, but waits. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't loud. It's standing in the light and watching the people who ignored you realize they were blind all along. And for the first time in my life, I knew my time was coming. Silence can be a powerful teacher. For a long time, I thought silence meant defeat. That if I wasn't being seen or heard, I didn't matter. But over the next few years, I learned that silence can also be a weapon. It's where strength grows in secret. After leaving home, I lived quietly. I stopped checking social media, stopped reading about Clara's accomplishments, stopped answering my parents' calls. I didn't hate them. I just didn't need the noise anymore. Instead, I filled that silence with something else. Work. Art became my language again. My studio, though tiny, became my world. Cracked walls, creaky floors, and the faint hum of traffic outside, it was all I needed. There were nights I'd paint until dawn, my hands trembling from exhaustion, but my heart alive in a way it had never been before. Each piece I created was another step out of the shadow I'd lived in for so long. At first, no one noticed. My exhibitions drew small crowds, local students, curious neighbors, an occasional art critic passing through. I didn't mind. For the first time, I was creating for myself, not for applause. But word spreads, even when you least expect it. One evening, after a small gallery showing, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as a producer from a cultural TV program that featured emerging artists. We're doing a special on new voices in contemporary art, she said. Would you be interested in being featured? I froze. Me? The invisible daughter? I nodded, trying not to show how my heart was racing. A week later, they came to film. Cameras in my tiny studio, lights bouncing off my paint-splattered walls, microphones picking up the quiet passion in my voice as I spoke about my work. When the episode aired, I didn't expect much. But the next morning, my inbox was flooded. Invitations, collaborations, gallery offers. People had seen me. It was strange, after years of chasing approval. Suddenly, strangers were giving me what my own family never did. Recognition. And with every new project, every article, every exhibition, I grew stronger. Not just as an artist, but as a person. I stopped trying to explain my worth to anyone. I let my work speak for itself, yet in quiet moments, I'd still think of them. I'd picture my parents sitting in their living room. Proud photos of Clara lining the shelves, the TV humming softly in the background. I wondered if they ever thought about me. If they ever missed me, then I'd remind myself, it didn't matter. Because I wasn't doing this for them. Years passed, and my name started appearing in national publications. My art was being described as hauntingly emotional, unapologetically real. And then came the email that changed everything. Congratulations. You've been nominated for the National Art Award, Artist of the Year. I reread it a dozen times, hands trembling. Me, the overlooked, forgotten daughter. The one who was never good enough. The award ceremony would be televised live across the country. It felt poetic, almost too perfect. The same parents who had ignored me would finally see me, whether they wanted to or not. As the event approached, I felt a storm of emotions, pride, fear, disbelief. Part of me wanted to call them, to say, turn on the TV that night. But another part of me whispered, no, let fate handle it. I didn't need to force anything. If destiny wanted them to see, they would. The days leading up to the ceremony were a blur. Media interviews, fittings, endless rehearsals. My name was everywhere. People called me an overnight success, not knowing that my overnight had lasted a decade. Each morning, I'd look at myself in the mirror and see someone I barely recognized. Not the timid girl who used to shrink in her sister's shadow, but a woman who had built herself from the ground up. Still, late at night when the lights went out and the city fell quiet, I'd feel that old ache, that small childlike wish to hear my parents say, "We're proud of you." The night before the awards, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching raindrops streak down the glass, the same kind of rain that had fallen on the day Clara stole my work. Funny how life circles back. I thought about everything, the pain, the silence, the years spent trying to be seen, and then I smiled. Because I realized something. I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I just wanted the truth to be visible. The truth of who I'd become. If my parents watched that ceremony, they would finally see me for what I always was. Enough. Not because I changed, but because I finally stopped trying to be what they wanted. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages, journalists, friends, fellow artists wishing me luck, and then one name stopped me cold, Mom. It was a text. "Hi, sweetheart. We saw your name on the nominees list. Is that really you? We're so proud. We'll be watching tonight." I stared at the screen, frozen. After all these years, now they wanted to be proud. I should have felt happy. But what I felt instead was peace, a quiet, powerful peace, because for the first time, I didn't need their pride to validate me. I smiled and typed back, "Yes, it's me," and that was enough. That night, as I slipped into my gown and prepared to step into the spotlight, I whispered to myself, "This is your moment. You've earned every second of it." The silence that once held me down had become my foundation, and tomorrow that silence would echo across the nation. The night of the awards arrived like a dream I had painted myself, with colors of hope, streaks of fear, and a quiet shimmer of destiny. I remember standing backstage, the low hum of conversation rolling through the grand auditorium. The lights were blinding, the crowd enormous, and yet I felt strangely calm. It was surreal, to be surrounded by people I had once only read about. Artists whose work hung in museums, filmmakers, poets, sculptors, and there I was, the invisible child, standing among them. The host's voice echoed through the hall. "Tonight, we celebrate the creators who dared to turn their pain into art." Their silence into voice. The words struck me like a pulse. It was as if the universe itself was narrating my story. Back home, I could almost imagine my parents sitting in front of the TV. I pictured my mom clutching the remote, my dad pretending to be uninterested but still watching closely, Clara probably scrolling through her phone, pretending she didn't care but curious enough to keep the channel on. They'd see my name flash across the screen. They'd hear the words, "Nominee for Artist of the Year." And for the first time, they'd have no power to look away. The ceremony began with dazzling performances, applause, and introductions. My category was scheduled near the end. Every minute felt like an hour. I sat in the front row, heart pounding, palms cold. The lights shimmered over the stage, reflecting off golden trophies lined up neatly on a velvet table. Around me, people whispered. Cameras clicked. Every so often, a screen would flash my face as they showcased snippets of my art. Images of hands, shadows, and eyes filled with light. The audience didn't know what those paintings truly meant. But I did. Each one carried a piece of my story. A story of being unseen. A story that had led me here. When the presenter finally walked on stage for my category, the world seemed to slow down. He smiled at the crowd and said, "This year's nominees for Artist of the Year have moved us in ways words cannot describe." Each of them turned vulnerability into something extraordinary. As he listed the names, I heard mine, Elena Moore. The applause washed over me, Elena. The name that once sounded small now echoed across millions of televisions. He opened the envelope. And the winner is... A pause, a heartbeat. Elena Moore. For a moment, I couldn't move. The room erupted in applause, cameras flashing, people rising to their feet. My breath caught in my chest. I stood, legs trembling, and began walking toward the stage. It felt like I was walking through every memory, every ignored painting, every dinner table silence, every time I was told I wasn't enough. And now, here I was, the world watching. As I reached the podium, the lights dimmed slightly. The golden award felt heavy in my hands, almost sacred. The crowd quieted. The host handed me the microphone, and all the noise inside me finally settled into one clear thought. This is it. I took a slow breath and began. When I was a child, I used to believe that love was something you earned. That if you worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, did everything right, people would notice you. A murmur rippled through the audience. But sometimes, I continued, no matter how hard you try, you remain invisible. Your efforts go unnoticed. Your voice, unheard. I looked down for a moment, steadying my breath. My journey here wasn't easy. There were years when I thought my art didn't matter. Years when I thought I didn't matter. But I've learned that even when no one sees you, you still exist. Your voice still has meaning. Your heart still creates. The camera zoomed in on my face. My voice trembled but didn't break. So this award, I said, lifting it slightly, is not just for me. It's for everyone who has ever been overlooked. Everyone who's been told they're not enough. Everyone who's lived in someone else's shadow. I paused, and my lips curved into a soft, almost bittersweet smile. Sometimes the ones you ignore are the ones who rise the highest. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. The audience erupted in applause. Some even stood. But I wasn't finished. I took one last breath and said, and to those who once couldn't see me, thank you. Because your silence gave me strength. Your doubt gave me direction. Without you, I wouldn't be here tonight. I stepped back from the microphone for a moment. There was complete stillness, then a wave of clapping that felt like thunder. Tears stung my eyes. Not of sadness, but release. Years of being unseen, finally visible. Back home. I imagined the living room where it all began. My mother's trembling hands holding the remote. My father, speechless, staring at the screen. And Clara, her phone forgotten in her lap. They couldn't interrupt me now. They couldn't dismiss, diminish, or deny. They had to watch. And that, right there, was the most poetic revenge of all. After the ceremony, reporters swarmed backstage asking questions about my inspiration, my journey, my past. I smiled politely, gave short answers, and slipped away quietly. Outside, the cool night air brushed against my face. The city lights shimmered like stars. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the other daughter. I felt whole. I looked up at the night sky and whispered, "You saw me now, didn't you?" Not to the crowd. Not to the cameras, but to the ghosts of the past that once kept me silent. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the little girl I used to be finally smile. The night after the award ceremony felt like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. The applause still echoed in my mind, the lights still danced behind my eyelids, and that golden trophy sat on my table, glowing softly under the city moonlight. But when the cameras stopped flashing and the crowd disappeared, I found myself alone again. It was a strange kind of silence. Not the empty, suffocating silence of my childhood home, but a peaceful one. Like the calm sea after a storm. I sat by the window, watching the city below, car lights weaving like veins of gold. Somewhere down there, people were laughing, celebrating, living their lives. And here I was, holding a moment that had taken a lifetime to earn, and yet, a small voice inside me whispered, "Now what?" The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications, messages, emails, calls. Journalists wanted interviews. Art galleries wanted partnerships. Strangers sent letters saying how my speech moved them to tears. But one message stood out. It was from Mom. "We watched your speech last night. Your father and I couldn't stop crying. You were incredible. We're so sorry for not seeing you before. We're proud of you, sweetheart." For a long time, I just stared at the screen. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just sat there, reading those words again and again. "We're proud of you." The words I had waited my entire life to hear. But they didn't feel the way I thought they would, because they came too late. Later that day, I received a call from Clara. "Hey," she said softly, almost hesitant. "I saw the ceremony. You were amazing." There was a pause. Neither of us spoke. For the first time in years, her voice didn't sound confident or polished. It sounded fragile. I should have never done what I did, she continued. Back then, I thought it was harmless. But it wasn't. I hurt you, and I know I can't undo it. Her words caught me off guard. For years. I had imagined this conversation. All the ways I'd tell her how deeply she'd wounded me, how her betrayal had changed me. But now, hearing her actually say it, I felt no satisfaction. Only understanding. Maybe that's what healing does. It makes revenge unnecessary. I forgive you, I said quietly. But I won't forget, she exhaled shakily. That's fair. And just like that, for the first time in our lives, there was honesty between us. That evening, the TV replayed my acceptance speech. I watched it from my couch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. Seeing myself on screen was surreal. The woman standing under those lights looked strong, unshakable, but I knew what it took to become her. The tears that no one saw. The loneliness that shaped me. The endless nights of doubt. Every word I spoke on that stage came from pain that had been buried for years. And somehow, by speaking it, I had released it. The weight was gone. Over the next few weeks, interviews and articles followed. My story became a symbol. The daughter who rose from the shadows, one headline read. People called it inspiring, but I didn't feel like a hero. I was just someone who finally stopped running from her reflection. A month later, the award organization asked if I would do a follow-up segment, a televised home interview, revisiting where it all began. I hesitated. Going back home meant facing everything I had left behind. The memories, the cold dinners, the comparisons. But deep down, I knew I needed closure, not just for them, but for me. So I agreed. The drive back felt endless. The landscape blurred past, fields, gas stations, the small-town sign I hadn't seen in years. When I finally pulled up in front of my parents' house, the air felt heavy like it carried ghosts. The door opened before I even knocked. Mom stood there, tears already in her eyes. Dad followed behind, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mom whispered, "You look beautiful." And I realized it wasn't the compliment that made me tear up. It was the fact that for the first time she was looking at me. The interview crew set up in the living room. Cameras, lights, microphones, the same kind of scene where I had once imagined Clara shining. Only this time, it was my turn. They asked me to sit between my parents on the couch. It felt awkward at first, but comforting in a strange way. The interviewer smiled. "Elena, your story has touched millions. How does it feel to be back home, surrounded by the people who shaped you?" I took a deep breath. "It feels full circle," I said slowly. "I think sometimes we spend our lives chasing the love we didn't get, only to realize we were capable of giving it to ourselves all along." Mom reached for my hand. "We're so sorry, honey," she whispered. Dad nodded, his voice low. "We should have seen you sooner." Tears welled up in my eyes. "It's okay," I said softly. Maybe I needed to disappear to learn how to stand. After the cameras left, the house fell silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not painful, not cold, just peaceful. Before I left, I walked into my old room. The faded posters, the worn desk, the unfinished sketch pinned to the wall. It was like stepping into a frozen version of my younger self. I smiled and whispered, "We made it, because we did. Every bruise, every scar, every tear had led me here, to peace." That night, as I drove back to the city, the stars looked brighter than I remembered. Maybe it was the same sky I used to stare at as a lonely child, wondering if anyone up there saw me. Now, I realized, I had become my own light. The day of the televised home segment arrived. The crew was already setting up when I got there. Bright lights, microphones clipped to my collar, a small camera gliding slowly across the living room that once made me feel invisible. It was strange, sitting there on the same couch where I'd once been ignored, surrounded by the same family who used to look right through me. But this time, it was me they had come to see. The interviewer, a kind woman with calm eyes, sat across from me. "Elena," she said, "millions of people were moved by your acceptance speech. Tonight, you have the chance to speak directly to those who followed your journey. What would you like to say to them?" The cameras turned toward me. The red recording light blinked like a heartbeat. I took a slow breath. "This story," I began, "isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever been told they're not enough. Anyone who's lived in the shadow of someone else's success. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mom's hand tighten around Dad's. When I was little, I continued, I thought being loved meant being perfect. I believed that if I did everything right, if I smiled, if I stayed quiet, if I worked hard, then maybe the people I loved would finally see me. My voice wavered for a second, but I didn't stop. But life doesn't work like that. Sometimes, no matter how much love you give, it isn't returned. Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who make you feel invisible. The interviewer stayed silent. Everyone did. The crew, my parents. Even the air felt still. I smiled faintly. But here's what I've learned. Being unseen doesn't mean you don't exist. It just means you're still becoming. Pain has a strange way of shaping people. It either breaks you or builds you. I looked up directly at the camera. For years, I thought my silence was weakness. But it wasn't. It was growth. I was becoming someone stronger, someone who could stand here today and say, you don't need their approval to be enough. My throat tightened. I saw my reflection in the camera lens. Calm, steady, unafraid. Invisibility is only temporary, I said. Because one day, the world will turn its head and wonder how they ever missed you. The interviewer leaned forward slightly. That's beautiful, Elena, but tell me, what gave you the strength to keep going? I hesitated, glancing at my parents before answering. The truth, I said simply. The truth that I was worth something, even when no one else thought so. The truth that I could write my own story, even if no one wanted to read it. And the truth that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. My mom's eyes filled with tears. Dad looked down at his hands, his expression unreadable. I went on softly but firmly. I used to think I wanted revenge. That one day, I'd make everyone who overlooked me regret it. But standing here now, I realize I didn't need revenge. I just needed to rise. I turned toward my parents, my voice gentle but steady. You once said you were proud of my sister. And you should be. She's accomplished a lot. But all I ever wanted was for you to be proud of me too. Not because I won something, but because I never gave up. Tears streamed down Mom's cheeks. Dad wiped his eyes quietly. Clara, sitting off camera, covered her mouth with trembling fingers. I smiled faintly. And tonight I think we can finally close that chapter. The interviewer nodded. What would you say to the younger version of yourself, the girl who felt invisible? I paused. My heart thudded softly. I'd tell her, you are not the shadow. You are the light trying to find its way through. Don't dim yourself just because others don't look your way. Keep shining, because one day, that light will blind the very people who once ignored it. The room was silent again. A silence that wasn't heavy this time. It was full, alive, overflowing with emotion. When the interview ended, applause broke out from the crew. A few were wiping tears from their faces. The producer whispered, that was one of the most powerful moments we've ever filmed. I nodded quietly, my heart steady but full. Mom reached for my hand. Elena, I don't know how we could have missed you all these years. I looked at her gently. You didn't miss me, Mom. You just didn't recognize me yet. She sobbed softly, pulling me into a hug. For the first time in my life, it didn't feel forced. It felt real. Dad placed his hand on my shoulder. We're proud of you, kiddo, he said, his voice trembling. We really are. And this time I believed him. That night, when the interview aired, social media exploded. Hashtags trended. Messages poured in from people who said my story gave them courage. Courage to speak up. To walk away. To believe in themselves. But I didn't read them all. Instead, I sat on my balcony, watching the stars flicker faintly through the city haze, because that's what my life had become. Light through haze. I thought about Clara, about my parents, about every moment that had led here, and I smiled. Because the truth was simple. I didn't need them to watch my speech on TV anymore. They had already seen what mattered. Me. The next morning, Clara came by with coffee. She didn't say much. Just sat beside me in silence. Finally, she whispered, You really did it, didn't you? I smiled. No, Clara, we did it. You played your part. I just learned from it, she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. For the first time in years, we laughed together, softly, awkwardly, but genuinely, And as the sun rose, painting the sky gold, I realized something. The best revenge was never about making them regret. It was about making myself proud. The morning after the interview aired, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It wasn't just journalists this time. It was people. Real people. Strangers from all over the world who had seen the broadcast, who'd seen my tears, my truth, and somehow found themselves in it. Messages flooded in. I felt invisible my whole life. Your words gave me strength. I showed your interview to my parents. For the first time, they finally understood me. You made me believe I could start again. Every word, every message. It felt like a piece of my own pain was being rewritten into something healing. But the most unexpected messages came from home. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. My old art teacher, even relatives who used to gush only about Clara, they all said the same thing. We didn't know. And I thought, of course they didn't. How could they? I had hidden my hurt so well, wearing smiles like armor. The difference now was that I didn't need to hide anymore. A few days later, I returned to my studio in the city. The walls were still covered in my paintings, the same ones that once told stories of loneliness and silence. But now they looked different. Brighter, lighter. I had spent years painting from pain, from absence. Now, for the first time, I wanted to paint from peace. I started sketching a new collection, Reclaimed Light. It wasn't about revenge or recognition. It was about rebirth, about what comes after you finally let go. Clara started visiting more often after the interview. At first, she'd just drop by with coffee, talking awkwardly about her work. Then slowly, our conversations deepened. We talked about our childhood, how it felt for both of us. I think they put too much pressure on me, she admitted once, staring into her cup. I was scared to fail. I thought if I wasn't perfect, they'd stop loving me too. Her voice broke a little. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't seen before. While I had lived in her shadow, she had lived under a spotlight that burned. We were both victims, just in different ways. It didn't erase what she'd done, but it made it easier to understand. We weren't rivals anymore. We were survivors. Mom called me every few days now. Her voice softer, gentler, always ending with the same line. We love you, sweetheart. We're proud of you. At first, it felt strange to hear it. Like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit yet. But over time, I realized she wasn't saying it to erase the past. She was saying it to build something new. Dad didn't say much. He never did. But one afternoon, he showed up at my studio unannounced. He looked around, silent, his eyes lingering on one of my larger pieces, a painting of a small girl standing in front of a blinding sun. He pointed to it and asked, "Is that you?" I nodded. It was. He stared for a long time, then whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner. It wasn't loud." It wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and sometimes real is enough. As months passed, my life changed in ways I could never have imagined. My art career flourished. International invitations, magazine covers, galleries waiting to showcase my next work. But fame wasn't what filled me. It was peace. Peace in knowing that I had walked through the fire and come out not burned, but reborn. I still painted late into the night sometimes, but now the strokes were softer. The colors warmer. Where there used to be shadows, there was light. One evening, I got a call from the National Art Foundation. They wanted to honor me again, this time not for a single piece, but for my impact. "Your story inspired thousands," the director said. "We'd like you to give the keynote speech this year." I laughed softly. "Another speech?" He chuckled. "Yes, but this time it's not about proving anything. It's about teaching." And he was right. When I stood on that stage months later, I didn't feel like the same girl who had once trembled in front of a crowd. I wasn't there to be seen anymore. I was there to shine. I spoke about empathy, about forgiveness, about how sometimes people hurt others because they can't face their own pain, and when the applause came, it didn't feel like validation. It felt like connection. Afterward, I walked off stage and saw my parents waiting by the exit. Mom had tears in her eyes again. Dad smiled proudly, and Clara hugged me tight. For once, it wasn't about who was better or who made them prouder. It was just a family, broken once, but not beyond repair. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means choosing not to carry it anymore, and I had finally put it down. That night, I took a walk by the river, the city lights rippling on the water like scattered stars. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who cried quietly in her room, clutching her ribbon from the art fair, wondering why her parents couldn't see her. If she could see me now, standing under this wide sky, she'd smile, maybe even laugh, because she'd finally understand she was never invisible. She was just waiting for her time. Back home, I placed my original first prize ribbon, the one I'd kept all those years, next to my national award on the shelf, side by side, the beginning and the breakthrough. Proof that the little girl who painted for love had grown into the woman who painted for truth. And that, in the end, was enough.